Week 3 is upon us. We are going to set our running back fantasy football lineups today. So if you guys have running back starts and sit question marks, you came to the right place. We're going to break down all of my top 36 running back rankings in tier list format, talk about the major injuries, talk about usage trends, talk about what we can expect going forward, some buy lows, some sell highs, everything the running back position will be covered in today's video. If you enjoy at any point, if you feel like you got some value from this video, go ahead down below, leave a like, subscribe if you're new around here. Now let's get into it. All right, so we're going to kick things off with the will they play tier. So this tier is basically me just recapping all of the week's injuries. Of course, we're talking about the running back position here, so there's going to be a lot of guys every week that I have to go over. A lot of guys that are going to be questionable every week, a couple guys that were ruled out this week, and of course, we did have a major injury in last week's game. So Nick Chubb, of course, he's going to be out for the year. We know the repercussions of that. We talked about it throughout the week when it came to Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt as far as waiver cases, just reporting it again in case you guys were living under a rock and didn't know that Nick Chubb is now out for the season. Then we had a couple other ticky-tack injuries last week that are going to result in some players missing some time. David Montgomery self-reported basically that he may be out a few weeks. He's expected to be out in week 3, but may not be a super lengthy absence. He suffered a thigh injury in week 2 against the Seattle Seahawks. He's officially doubtful right now for week 3, but I'm expecting him to probably be out and maybe be out again next week in week 4. So Justice Hill, another guy that suffered an injury, it sounds like either in practice or he suffered it in week 2's game. He's dealing with a turf toe injury. He's already been ruled out for the Baltimore Ravens, so don't have to worry about whether or not he's going to play. But the bigger issue is that it could be a multi-week absence. So for those of you guys that have Gus Edwards on your roster, looks like a big-time upgrade for him. Melvin Gordon and some other running backs involved, probably Keaton Mitchell maybe sees a little bit of an uptick in work, but I would say Gus Edwards is the only real fantasy-relevant guy that I see, unless we see otherwise in week 3. And then Jamal Williams suffered a hamstring injury on Monday night. He is definitely going to be out this week. He's already been ruled out, but keep an eye on the timeline that we get here for Jamal Williams because fantasy doctors think he'll be out for like week 4, week 5 as well. Of course, Alvin Kamara will be back from suspension following week 3, but it looks like it's wheels up for Kendre Miller this week to be the lead back. He was a full participant in practice all week. They drafted him in the 3rd round, but we will probably see a bit of Tony Jones mixed in, maybe some Taysom Hill looks as well. So keep that in mind with the Saints backfield this week. And then Austin Eckler, the biggest, fantasy relevant guy that's been officially ruled out. He is ruled out yet again. So fire up Josh Kelly, and I'll talk about him in a little bit once I get to his tier. The concerning thing with the way that Brandon Staley talked about Austin Eckler, though, is that it sounds like he wasn't even really close to playing this week. He might even be out for a number of weeks still, closer to week 5, week 6. If you guys were paying attention back in week 2 when I did this last week, they talked about, the fantasy doctors talked about how they thought it was a high ankle sprain for Austin Eckler and that he could be out for, week 3, week 4, week 5, potentially not coming back until week 6 as well. Is what this looks like this is that Austin Eckler is dealing with a much more severe injury than was initially reported. So definitely bad news for those of you guys who have Austin Eckler, but good news for my fellow Josh Kelly bag holders because I do have him in my home league, and I definitely need to start him this week with Ayuk being out. So the only true real questionable running back this week is Aaron Jones. I suppose Isaiah Pacheco too is listed as questionable, but he did get in 2 limited practices this week, so I'm probably expecting him to go. Aaron Jones also didn't practice Wednesday. Of course, he didn't play in week 2 after suffering a hamstring injury in week 1. He was a limited practice in Thursday and Friday's practices, though. My gut says that he'll probably be active, and he might be on like a pitch count, but I would probably temper expectations for Aaron Jones, more so as like a high-end RB2. So when I talk about the high-end RB2s here, if Aaron Jones plays, that's where he's going to probably fit into. And if he doesn't play, A.J. Dillon is probably going to fit into the flex plays tier. So now let's get into the actual running back tier list itself. The running backs 1 to 12. Of course, I just skim over these every week because these guys are obviously in your lineup, and I'll try and highlight, who has a good matchup, who has like a high-scoring game environment, who potentially might not have a good matchup, that kind of thing. So the elite running backs in this top 12 tier here, Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, Tony Pollard, Travis Etienne, Ramondre Stevenson, Kenneth Walker, and Jahmyr Gibbs all have good matchups, so they all have favorable defenses, bottom half of the league or so in fantasy points allowed to the running back position and rush defense DVOA allowed to the running back position as well. So those guys could be in to overperform, especially Bijan in a very, very good spot this week. Some potential guys that are in high-scoring game environments, both Bijan and Gibbs. I expect that Falcons-Lions game to probably be pretty high-scoring. Tony Pollard and the Dallas Cowboys are implied for a lot of points against the Arizona Cardinals, nearly 2-touchdown favorites, so good environment for him. Christian McCaffrey, who we already, of course, saw play on Thursday night, he balled out in a very good game environment for him. And then James Cook, also a high implied point total for the Buffalo Bills as usual. And then some running backs that might struggle a little bit this week, but they're still in your lineup. They're still top 12 guys. Josh Jacobs, a little bit of a tougher matchup this week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Derrick Henry, again, also a tougher matchup this week in a lower scoring game environment against the Cleveland Browns. And then Joe Mixon's matchups are about even across the board, but he's the last guy that I didn't really talk about in that tier. Usually I like to highlight a guy or two from this top 12 tier because, you know, we do have some usage and I do have some explaining to do because I do have Jahmyr Gibbs at RB9 this week, mainly due to the fact that David Montgomery isn't expected to play. I do expect that we're going to get a lot of, you know, Craig Reynolds, but we saw Jahmyr Gibbs' workload go from 27% of the snaps last week to 48% of the snaps this past week. We saw him get a high target share, a lot of targets, touching the ball a lot through the air, and I do think we're going to get a potentially high-scoring game environment, and the Falcons are a pretty, you know, middle-of-the-road type of run defense, so I do really like Jahmyr Gibbs as a top 10 play this week. And then my start of the week here is my RB12 in my rankings, which is Raheem Mostert. Salvin Ahmed will be out this week by the sounds of it. Definitely be sure to stash Devon Achane, who was their third-round pick out of Texas A&M. But I do think most likely scenario that happens here is that Raheem Mostert gets a massive workload. He's been a 70% snap share running back in each of the first two games with Salvin Ahmed with Salvin Ahmed active. So the fact that he's out now definitely bodes well for Raheem Mostert. And he plays, of course, for an elite offense. The Miami Dolphins have been absolutely humming so far. They're at home, which it's crazy. They've been playing their first two games on the road so far. Now they're at home, 48.5 point over-under. This game could absolutely crush this week. A lot of the sharps are betting the over in this Miami Dolphins-Denver Broncos game. So definitely love Raheem Mostert. He is my start of the week this week. So now let's get into the high-end RB2s. Of course, I breeze over the top 12, and then I get into the more nitty-gritty stuff when it comes to the guys that you're actually deciding between. And again, if you guys are unaware, if I have somebody ranked at RB14 and somebody ranked at RB17, it means that I would start my RB14 over my RB17. Pretty self-explanatory, but I see a lot of comments down below being like, would you start this guy over this guy? It's like, I mean, realistically, all you have to do is look at the tier list to get my answer on that. So running back 13 for me is Kyren Williams. He is facing a Bengals defense that has been bottom 6 in the NFL in rush defense DVOA allowed to opposing running backs. So specifically to running backs, they've been a little bit weaker. Kyren Williams was a literal workhorse last week when Cam Akers was made inactive. He got 97% of the snaps, most of the carries, most of the routes, all of the inside the 5 work, all the long down and distance work. Of course, he had a monster fantasy performance. I do expect that, you know, Ronnie Rivers or whoever else in that backfield will be a little bit more involved this week, but I still think that Kyren Williams is like a lock for like 70-75% of the snaps at the bare minimum. So he is definitely a must play this week against the Bengals. I think that Joe Burrow will be active for that game on Monday night, but you never know if that game gets out of hand because Burrow wasn't playing. That could be in a lot of rushing work for Kyren Williams in the fourth quarter and things of that nature. So running back 14 for me is my own Tampa Bay Buccaneer, Rachaad White. Rachaad White is getting also a fantastic workload, and as someone who's watched pretty much every game of his career, I can tell you emphatically that last week was the best game I've ever seen Rachaad White play. He looked decisive. He looked, efficient. He was able to make people miss, which is something that he's kind of struggled with. The big bad Eagles defense is pretty tough against the run. They're very difficult to run, especially up the middle against those Georgia defensive tackles and stuff. But he should make his hay through the air. We know that Rachaad White is heavily involved in the route participation category, ran 70% of the Buccaneers' routes last week, and also gets a decent amount of targets as well. He's definitely a guy that I'm rising on, as I broke down in Tuesday's video, as someone who's skyrocketing up my rest of season rankings. Should be a consistent mid RB2 mainstay every week that I do this video. Running back 15 for me on the week is DeAndre Swift, and this one should be an interesting week for DeAndre Swift because the Eagles backfield, even though we've had 2 weeks of the NFL season, we still really don't know what we're getting out of this backfield because in week 1, we saw a surprising like Kenneth Gainwell workhorse game, and then in week 2, Kenneth Gainwell was out, and we saw DeAndre Swift be the workload guy in that game. So with both of them probably going to be active for this game, how much does Kenneth Gainwell eat into DeAndre Swift, which is why I have him ranked at RB15. If I knew he was going to get last week's workload, I'd probably rank him inside my top 12. But the Bucs defense, of course, is very solid against the run. Question is, by how much does Kenneth Gainwell impact DeAndre Swift? So for me, I think it's a good game environment. It should be a pretty high-scoring game. So I'm firing up DeAndre Swift, but definitely temper expectations as far as his workload is concerned, because I don't think we can anticipate exactly what happened last Thursday night to happen again for DeAndre Swift. So running back 16 for me is Alexander Mattison in this high-end RB2s tier. The Vikings traded for Cam Akers this past week, but I actually don't feel all that differently about Alexander Mattison now going forward than before they traded for Cam Akers. So if your resident, Alexander Mattison manager is willing to sell him for like an RB3 price tag, I would actually be willing to buy Alexander Mattison, which is something I never thought I would say. But I do think, knowing that he played the Philadelphia Eagles and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in his first 2 games, those are both really strong run defenses. He's getting the workload. He's getting exactly what we expected him to get. 70% snap share guy. He basically has Raheem Mostert's workload without the efficiency. This week, he's got a 54-point over-under game against the Los Angeles Chargers. So if I'm you guys and I have Alexander Mattison on my team, he's in my lineup this week, and if he has a big performance, I might consider selling high on that, because I don't think Alexander Mattison is the greatest running back in the world. But if somebody's panicking right now, today's Saturday as I'm recording this, you can maybe get Alexander Mattison in exchange for like Jerome Ford or something like that, or maybe even a worse option on your bench. And I think Mattison can be a consistent every week RB2, even with Cam Akers added into the fold. I don't think it's going to affect his workload all that much. I think that hurts Ty Chandler more than anything, and Cam Akers has shown really since his Achilles injury that he's not quite the same running back. So Mattison, a guy that I'm definitely firing up this week. A 54-point over-under game is really all I have to say. He has a very good chance of finding the end zone in week 3. Running back 17 for me is Javonte Williams, and we are really starting to see some progress out of Javonte Williams' workload, and both ACL bros, to be honest, we're seeing some progress out of. I will start with Javonte as of him and Breece Hall. I think I prefer him this week because he's got 34 opportunities in the first 2 games, including 9 targets. And again, we got to remember that this Denver Broncos offense is ramping him up. So this is the worst workload we're going to see pretty much all season for Javonte Williams. This is the most we're going to see Samaje Perine involved with Javonte Williams. Very encouraged by the usage that we've seen so far, and I think it's only a matter of weeks before Javonte Williams has that breakout game where the buy low window slams shut and you can't buy this guy anymore. So, and it could be this very week, because the Dolphins rank 28th against fantasy running backs so far this season, and the Sharps absolutely love the over in this game more than any other game on this slate. So if Javonte Williams has a spike in his usage, let's say he gets 60% of the snaps, he gets most of the carries, he gets another 4 or 5 targets or something like that, we could see a monster game out of Javonte Williams, and I don't think that is baked into his price on the open market right now. So if you have somebody like Kyron Williams, sell him for Javonte Williams plus. If you have somebody like Jerome Ford, who you got off the waiver wire, sell him for Javonte Williams potentially plus as well, because I do think down the stretch this guy could be a league winner. Same goes for Breece Hall, who is my RB18 on the week right now, ACL bro number 2 on the docket here. I realized this was tough sledding for Breece Hall last week, and he barely got any touches because the Cowboys defense is just so dominant against the run. But I think the first takeaway that the Jets coaching staff is going to have after last week's game is we need to get Breece Hall the ball more. Like, there's no way that we're going to win games if we expect Zach Wilson to throw all these passes and never use our running game. Zach Wilson is a bad quarterback, but this should remain a lot closer of a game against the Patriots rather than last week's blowout. The Patriots are an 0-2 team. They're not nearly the team that they've been in years past, so I think that the Jets can win this game. I think they can at least keep it close. The defense in Dallas that they played last week is the single best run defense in the entire NFL against fantasy running backs, and their DVOA against the run is even better pretty much than the second place team by a lot. So the Patriots, 25th best run defense DVOA through 2 games. They are a lot softer of a matchup for Breece Hall. I think the Jets coaching staff, like I said, is going to make it an emphasis to run the ball this week because that's the only way they're going to win. The ramp up for Breece Hall is going to be an ongoing process. Again, with Javonte Williams and with Breece Hall, we should not have expected week 1, week 2, potentially week 3 this week to be their best performances of the season. Hopefully we get to see more of the ramp up in week 3. We get to see more of Breece Hall on the field a little bit more, because last week they just completely phased him out of the game plan, as did they with all of the running backs. But I do have a good feeling about this game. I think that the Patriots will let up some on the ground and Breece Hall can get things done. So running back 19 for me on the week. Now we get into the low-end RB2s tier. So these are more guys that if you have a solid wide receiver option, you could consider leaving them on the bench if you have a flex decision. But for the most part, they're pretty solid options. So Running back 19 for me in my rankings right now is Josh Kelly. So Austin Eckler was ruled out. We know that. And apparently it looks like Austin Eckler is not going to be out there for a number of weeks still, according to Brandon Staley. So definitely good news if you have Josh Kelly. I know he was terrible last week. He was complete dog shit, but we have a 54-point over-under game here. And the Minnesota Vikings have been absolutely decimated on the ground so far this season. Of course, DeAndre Swift just absolutely destroyed them last week on Thursday Night Football. So I think Josh Kelly, the workload is the important thing, right? He was playing the Tennessee Titans. It was a tough run defense, but 78% of the snaps, most of the carries, most of the routes, all the 2-minute drill work, all the long down and distance work, that is exactly what we want from Josh Kelly with Austin Eckler out of the lineup. So I'm very encouraged with what I saw workload-wise, and this is a much easier matchup. So Josh Kelly needs to be in your lineup. I think you could make the argument that I have him too low right now. I'm just kind of tempering expectations a little bit, and the Chargers should be able to run the ball with ease in this matchup. So RB20 in my rankings is Isaiah Pacheco, who suffered a hamstring injury on Wednesday, but he did practice in a limited fashion on Thursday and Friday, so I think he should be fine, good to go for this week. The running backs against the Bears so far this year have absolutely eaten. Obviously, Aaron Jones, running back 1 on the week in week 1, and Rachaad White was running back 8 in week 2 on the week. Both guys went for over 20 PPR points, so if Isaiah Pacheco plays, he's very well in line to set up to have a breakout game here. And if he's surprisingly out, if for whatever reason he's not active for Sunday's game, I do think that CEH and Jerick McKinnon are viable flex plays if we don't have Pacheco for this game. But I will say, if you guys can buy low on Pacheco right now, he's probably not worth a whole lot. He might have a monster game against the Chicago Bears. The Chiefs are big-time favorites. If they have to run the ball to salt the game away, Pacheco could definitely have a lot of work in this game, a lot of carries in this game. So running back 21 for me in my rankings is Tyler Algier. The Lions are so bad against the run. They're absolutely awful against the run. Their defense ranks 31st in DVOA allowed to opposing running backs. Well, now they just have to face probably the best running back duo in the entire NFL, probably the best running offense in the entire NFL. Arthur Smith has to be licking his chops this week, knowing that there's zero chance that he is not feeding Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier 40-plus carries combined in this game. So if you have Tyler Algier, I think he needs to be in your lineup, especially when I talk about these like fringe options who have better workloads than Algier, but the efficiency could be off the charts this week for Algier, could get into the end zone as well. So I really do like him as a solid flex play. I nearly made him my start of the week as well. Running back 22 for me in my rankings is Brian Robinson. I'm still selling high on Brian Robinson because I think you can get Javonte Williams, Breece Hall, potentially even Jahmyr Gibbs or Josh Jacobs straight up for this guy right now. If not, if you have to add a little piece on top of him, because he had a monster game last week. He was the RB1 on the week. His value is probably going to come back down to earth because his workload doesn't say like I'm an RB1 overall caliber guy. He's more so of like an RB2 archetype. And if you can get guys that have RB1 upside, like the guys I just listed, then you definitely probably should take advantage of that. And he has a tough matchup this week. The Bills are a top 5 running back matchup in DVOA allowed, so they are very good against the run. The Commanders might be down early as well against the Bills and forced to throw the ball, which of course we know is more so Antonio Gibson's wheelhouse. So I don't really love the matchup for Brian Robinson this week. I know it's really tempting to just throw him into your lineup because he popped off last week, but I will say if you have better options, I think you can leave him on your bench. Running back 23 in my rankings here is James Conner. Might have one of the best workloads in the entire NFL. Not going to sugarcoat it, but the Cardinals are nearly 2 touchdown underdogs. And the Cowboys, like I said, absolutely shut down Saquon Barkley in week 1, absolutely shut down the Jets running attack in week 2. They might be the single most dominant run defense in the entire league, and this game script is horrible for James Conner. But he is involved as a receiver. He could probably catch some passes in this game. So I do still have him rated as an RB2 here. And then running back 24, closing out this tier for me, is Najee Harris, who's been objectively bad this season. Of 46 qualified running backs on PFF, he ranks as the 37th in offensive grade right now. And the Steelers' offense is virtually unwatchable outside of a big George Pickens touchdown last week. They can't get anything going. I think they had like 8 first downs or something like that in last week's game. If you guys have Najee Harris, you better hope for a good performance here because the Raiders are so bad against running backs. So if Najee Harris can't get it going in this matchup, you're going to have a big time problem on your hands because we just saw James Cook absolutely decimate these guys. The split is as we predicted through the preseason, right? We were all off of Najee Harris. He was one of our biggest busts because we expected Jaylen Warren to be more involved in this backfield, and he absolutely has been. The mythological workload that people were drafting Najee Harris for doesn't exist anymore. This is not rookie year Najee Harris anymore. We're talking about a guy, him and Brian Robinson realistically should be thought of as no different. And honestly, Brian Robinson's in a better offense. So if you wanted to take B-Rob rest of the season, I wouldn't blame you, and I, in fact, actually have it ranked that way. So Najee Harris, not a great option. If he has a good game this week, definitely get out before you can. I would sell high if possible because the Raiders are a cake matchup, and if the Steelers can't do anything on the ground in this game, it is going to be a big-time problem. So let's get into the flex plays this week. So I'll try and rattle through these a little bit faster. The flex plays, running back 25 for me is Jerome Ford, one of the biggest waiver pickups this week. No Chubb now, brutal matchup versus Tennessee in a game that we know has a lot of steam on the under, as I talked about in Thursday's video. Ford is still viable, but we don't really know what the split will be with Kareem Hunt because Kareem Hunt comes back into this team here. He knows the offense. He's not going to have to learn anything. So it's possible we get more of a split than we're expecting, but Jerome Ford, if you picked him up, he's still a viable flex play. Gus Edwards, also a pretty good flex play this week. He is alone in this backfield now, probably just him and Melvin Gordon going forward with Justice Hill out. Gus Edwards, I would imagine, would absorb most of the carries and short yardage work in the red zone, but we don't know how Melvin Gordon's going to fix in. Ravens/Colts is going to be a sneakily high-scoring game as well, so I actually do really like Gus Edwards as somebody to throw in your flex spot and just kind of hope for a touchdown this week, so he is my RB26. Running back 27 for me is Dameon Pierce. This Texans backfield is so weird, man. It went from Dameon Pierce was a workhorse in preseason to a three-way timeshare in week 1 between Dameon Pierce, Mike Boone, and Devin Singletary. And then week 2 comes along, and it's a three-way timeshare between Dameon Pierce, Dario Gumbawale, and Devin Singletary. So overall, this is just such a mess, this backfield. Pierce also has a tough matchup this week. The Jags have been very good against the run. I think it's time to maybe give up on the dream that Dameon Pierce is going to be a workhorse. We got to remember that this was a 49ers coaching staff that came in, and it looks like they're deploying like a committee, just like Kyle Shanahan usually did before he got Christian McCaffrey in San Francisco. So not great news for Dameon Pierce bag holders there, but he still is a flex play this week. Running back 28 for me is Zach Moss. Elite workload in week 2. Still feels like a bit like a Fugazi. I'm not sure if we're going to see that continue, but the Ravens are literally number 1 in the NFL in EPA allowed per rush since trading for Roquan Smith last year. So they have been an elite run defense. They don't allow anything on the ground. And Zach Moss, I'm not really 100% convinced that he's a great running back. So I would probably not start him if you don't have to. If you have, wide receiver 30 to 40 type of guys that Danny would have talked about in yesterday's video, then definitely keep in mind that you would probably want to start those guys over Zach Moss, but he does get a pretty decent workload. So if you have to start him, it's not the end of the world. Running back 29 for me in my rankings here is Miles Sanders. He has a middle-of-the-road matchup this week. Maybe having Andy Dalton actually helps him out, and I might honestly move him up a little bit after Andy Dalton was named the starter because Bryce Young has looked a tad overwhelmed so far this season, and Andy Dalton, because he's a veteran, he might help this offense gel a little bit more and get some chemistry going. But the split is still pretty solid for Miles Sanders, and he's getting a decent workload, so he is inside my top 30. And then finally, closing out this year, we have number 30 for the Chicago Bears, my running back 30, Roschon Johnson. And last week, I thought we were going to get a massive Roschon Johnson breakout game because before the games actually kicked off, we heard Jay Glazer report that Roschon would get a big workload with Deontay Foreman inactive. That didn't really happen, but he is kind of trending up, and he does look great. The Chiefs should get up big in this game. Roschon Johnson is the long down and distance and 2-minute drill back. High over-under game as well, so I really like him this week as a guy that could potentially break out. And then if you guys are absolutely desperate, these are 5 deep league flex plays that I don't think are terrible options. These guys rank from like RB30 to RB36 for me. Kendre Miller, obviously Jamal Williams is out. Kamara's still suspended. So, and now he is back. He practiced in full all week, so he should be good to go. Running back 32 for me, A.J. Dillon. If Aaron Jones is probably out, he's going to move just ahead of that like Zach Moss, Dameon Pierce area. But even if Aaron Jones plays, I expect him to be a limited option at some point. So deep league flex for A.J. Dillon is fine. Of course, Matt Breida was in this area as well, who already played on Thursday Night Football and scored a touchdown. Jaylen Warren, I think, is a deep league flex option as well because, like I said, the Raiders are just so bad against the run, and he's getting almost comparable workload to Najee Harris. So if he gets 15 touches and Najee Harris gets 20 touches, I think Jaylen Warren can do more with those 15 touches than Najee can do with 20. So he's a decent option as well. And then running back 35 is Khalil Herbert. Obviously, similar to Roschon, I like the game environment, and he's a decent workload bet as well. So if you guys got some value from this video, if I helped you start your lineups here, if I helped you set your start-sit decisions and your flex decisions, leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you're new, leave any questions down below as well. I'll help you, sort out your lineup down there. If you guys want access to our weekly rankings, if you want access to our rest of season rankings, a big sweeping update to our dynasty rankings are coming as well. Check out the site, flockfantasy.com. Use the promo code FSE for 30% off to get access to first priority on dynasty decisions, get access to everything that we're doing over there, and as well as everything that all the other favorite dynasty and redraft content creators that you follow are doing over there as well. And check out Underdog Fantasy. Of course, use promo code FSE for 100% back up to $100. Right now, they're doing a special limited time offer to match your first deposit up to $500. So normally it's up to $100. This week and next week, I believe, is up to $500. So if you want to deposit over on Underdog Fantasy, you can get a lot of bang for your buck over there. And of course, you will also get our weekly rankings for free when you do that, and our rest of season rankings for free. So if that interests you, both things will be linked down below in the pinned comment. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.